In The Sopranos, we follow New Jersey mob boss Tony Soprano as he looks to balance his family life with his gangster lifestyle. In addition to his trials and tribulations as a mobster, Tony's life is also plagued with family issues which the average viewer can relate to. This is including but not limited to his son AJ Soprano. Anthony Jr. is a lazy, underachieving teenager who is a constant source of headaches for his parents. Lacking drive, ambition, or the ability to follow in his father's footsteps in the mob life, AJ is a spoiled and selfish whiner who takes his privileged lifestyle for granted. Some of his achievements in life include being expelled from school for cheating, crashing his mother's car, having his eyebrows mysteriously disappear, and a pathetic attempt to take a revenge against Uncle Junior after Junior shoots Tony. A combination of stress, existential issues and other problems lead AJ down a spiral of depression, leading him to make an attempt on his own life, and even that he couldn't do successfully. On this channel, I've made several videos where I challenge the way certain Sopranos characters are seen, analysing whether there's another way to see their characters and whether the status quo is wrong in the way they perceive a character. Previous examples include my videos Why You're Wrong About Bobby Bacala, The Case for Phil Leotardo, and Why You're Wrong About Little Carmine. And if you like what you see, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay up to date with future videos. Today I wanted to offer Anthony Jr. the benefit of the doubt, a kid who is one of, if not the most hated character in The Sopranos. Fans are constantly expressing irritableness at AJ's obnoxious behaviour, his selfishness, and his inability to take account for his own actions. Now, I want to preface this video by saying I absolutely hate this kid. There were so many times, like when his mother trips coming after him up the stairs and he just carries on walking, so many times where I just wanted to punch the guy or slap some sense into him. He's a selfish little asshole who's never had to taste even a whiff of the kind of difficulties others in the world his age have to face, even those who live near him, let alone around the world, like Phil Leotardo's brother Billy, 47 years old. He was just a kid. AJ, on the other hand, is a weak, snivelling little pathetic whiner who had everything put on a plate for him. I can't remember a single time where he ever took full responsibility of any of his cock-ups, and he's always ready to put the blame on other factors or people. One could argue there is even a Machiavellian element to AJ's behaviour. In fact, that's not even up for debate, it's just a question of how far it goes. For example, when Tony tells AJ that Bobby is dead, he only starts crying and talks about being depressed after Tony puts responsibility on his plate by telling him to be there for his mother, implying AJ was using his quote-unquote depression to get out of his obligations. AJ's depression is definitely real, but that doesn't mean elements of it can be faked and used to his advantage, in the typical way teenagers try to avoid responsibility through excuses. Right. Now that I've got that out of my system, let's actually make a case for AJ and his weird behaviour. You know, if we're honest with ourselves, I actually think that part of the reason why the Sopranos community hates AJ with such passion is because, however subconsciously, dare I say it, we see a bit of ourselves in AJ. Though I'm not sure I agree with David Chase, where on the Talking Sopranos podcast he made out that AJ is just a typical American teenager. At least I hope the typical American teenager isn't like that. But there is an element of me that thinks that we as fans envisage and imagine ourselves as cool, suave, and in control like Tony Soprano if we existed in this universe. But the reality is that we would probably be more like AJ than Tony. Perhaps there's even direct features viewers share with AJ. It's ironic then that Tony actually sees his own faults and insecurities manifest in AJ, and he ends up, as he tells Melfi, hating his own son for it, when, if he looked a little deeper and was a little more honest, actually hates himself for it. At the very least, the portrayal of Anthony Jr. feels like an authentic depiction of an adolescent. As we know, AJ is extremely privileged. He does not want for anything. But not having to work for anything is not a good thing. Sure, it gives you an opportunity to explore possibilities in your life without having to worry about paying the mortgage, but a byproduct is that it can kill your drive, extinguish your passion. How do you motivate a person who already has everything? This is directly linked to AJ feeling like he and life itself has no purpose because he has no drive. It's like that saying, constraints breeds creativity. AJ had none because he had no constraints. He hops from job to job, this social group to that, and the Blanca subplot shows how desperate he is to mean something to someone in life, to have a role to play, and it also shows how he can be caring to others. Political scientist Warren Farrell, in his book The Boy Crisis, argues that because young men are no longer sole breadwinners, warriors, or leaders, they experience a purpose void, leading to alienation and withdrawal, which perfectly encapsulates AJ as a character and highlights why he was so devastated when he lost Blanca, a relationship where he had purpose. He even had a temporary role as a father figure. AJ is confused and depressed, as are many of his generation. He had grown up in the age of information, mass information, where kids know things at a young age that even adults don't know. He became a man at the dawn of social media and all the mental issues that brings. He witnessed 9/11, he had access to and was looking up things like Bush's war on terror. He is informed that Columbus, who was a great Italian explorer and in this house is a hero, was a slave trader. There's a scene where he's reading a people's history of the United States of America, detailing the bloody past of the US. Many of these hard-hitting realities were things the older generation were ignorant of, happily accepting facades like the American dream, whereas AJ is faced with the challenge that the notions he grew up with were false, and quite frankly, the pressure on him is just too much to take. Ignorance is bliss, as they say, and at the very least, he was facing these things and trying to come to terms with them, instead of injecting himself with an overdose of cognitive dissonance like his sister, who, for all her qualities and the amount of times AJ is compared to her, seems to have become a mob lawyer by the end of the show, choosing to ignore the harsh realities of the Italian-American mob and the poverty of the Mezzogiorno. The older generation have their tribes. They have affinity for, say, the church. They have patriotism, like Silvio. They have their allegiance to La Cosa Nostra, like Phil Leotardo. AJ and many of his generation have none of this. They have nothing to hold on to and cherish and live for. He just can't find his place in the world, find belonging, acceptance, and something to fight for. He even tries out the gangster lifestyle with inept results. And when he is in on burning a guy's foot because he didn't pay back money, the incident has such an effect on AJ that he shortly tries to kill himself. Those brutal and violent friends temporarily pulled him out of his depression because they gave him a sense of belonging, but he came to realize he was nothing like them, which is partly at least because he has a conscience. AJ is reacting to the disillusion that the world is a dark place, and his own existence was based on privilege. Unlike Meadow, he recognizes that privilege, and it manifests in feelings of guilt. But at the same time, he hypocritically holds on to materialist values and consumerism, even though he critiques these things, because they're so hard to give up. Think of that scene where Tony gets him a car and he mules over whether he should go ahead with it as it damages the environment, but he does so anyway. With all of the things going on in AJ's head, it's no wonder Tony describes him by saying, he's got the world by the balls, every fucking advantage, and he hits one little pothole and goes into hysterics. Funnily enough, this is almost a carbon copy of when Tony says about himself, I got the world by my balls and I can't stop feeling like I'm a fucking loser. Jigsaw from the military school nails it when he says, we've created too many options for our kids. Can't blame them for being confused. When things go wrong, we fob them off onto the ever-burgeoning for-profit substance recovery industry. And then there's the parents. The things that AJ was going through are nothing new, but he lacked parents who had the emotional maturity to guide him through life, and as such, some of the blame must lie at their feet. AJ shares Tony's instability. In fact, depression can be a hereditary trait. He gets the same panic attacks that Tony did. And AJ also shares Carmela's trait of valuing materialism and wealth, whilst knowing beneath the surface that these comforts come from dark, evil places. When did AJ ever have a chance to explore things he wanted to make mistakes, to learn from them, to learn how to pick himself up emotionally after defeat, instead of having it in his subconsciousness that his parents would always be there as a safety net to wash away his cock-ups? People like that, you come to find, never grow up and become fully functioning, disciplined adults because mummy and daddy are always there when things go wrong. Whenever AJ did show initiative to take his life in a certain direction, his parents did not support him, which is not unlike many parents, but look at the way AJ mentions wanting to go to Harvard or West Point, and Tony making fun out of him for it. And later, Tony brings him wanting to go to Harvard up, and AJ flat out denies it and says he could never get in. At face value, you might think, that snivelling, lying piece of crap, but imagine how much his confidence would have been shattered as a result of the way his dad reacted to his hopes. And now he doesn't even acknowledge he had this goal, or maybe doesn't even remember, implying he had internalized his father's criticism. When has Tony ever supported his son and been proud of him? The only example really is when AJ proved he had the makings of a varsity athlete, but this was him doing something his father wanted to do, and after the game, he wanted to celebrate his own way, with a Nintendo, with his dad. But his father asks when he's going to throw that thing out, leading AJ to capitulate and do what his dad wants. With a father like Tony, AJ would never have the opportunity to grow out of his own shell and be his own man. And then there's Carmela with her mollycoddling, suffocatingly tight, which was partly the reason why AJ found the real world such a hard place to live in. But that's when she isn't emulating Tony and stepping all over AJ's confidence, like when he proudly declares he got a C in school and Carmela shoots him down instead of giving AJ the motherly warmth and encouragement that might have helped him in that instance. Imagine your father brazenly and openly saying, "I'm supposed to get a vasectomy when this is my male heir," right in front of your face. Sure, AJ wasn't exactly covering himself in glory in that scene, but that is so hurtful that even Carmela changed her direction in the conversation and demands an apology from Tony, who simply walks away all macho. But what's so cool and manly about cruelly insulting your son, which will only make him feel more of a loser? And Tony himself, what with how he talks about his parents in therapy, is a perfect example of how childhood trauma does not go away in adulthood. And when he opens up with his insecurities, like asking, "Why were we born?" or when he says, "There is no God," they dismiss his anxieties. If you were really serious, why not have AJ sit down with an expert and discuss, say, the cosmological contingency argument for God's existence, the fine-tuning argument, the design argument, or even bring in the priest to have a spiritual discussion? But instead, their response is allowed, "Hey," and that was it. I've hardly even touched on the fact that Anthony's father is a murdering gangster. AJ is a lot more like Tony than he realizes, and the show points this out on several occasions. Tony doesn't want AJ to follow in his footsteps because he knows deep down what he does is wrong, but he externalizes this by doing the easy thing and blaming AJ as a person, saying that life isn't for him, that he's a, quote, good guy. Not that the life itself is not good and you should stay away as far as possible. Tony is introspective enough to recognize he has toxic traits, and many of these are also present in Anthony. But Tony resents AJ for having these traits. Both are lazy, both are depressive, both have panic attacks and wallow in self-pity. The Many Saints of Newark further establishes these similarities, like Tony cheating in school. They even have the same lines of dialogue, both saying in therapy, "Why can't we all just get along?" The biggest difference between the two is that Tony externalizes his feelings or indulges in degeneracy, but AJ, who doesn't have outlets like the mob and would be no use in that life anyway, internalizes his feelings. In other words, Tony hurts others, AJ hurts himself. Depression is rage turned inward, as Melfi says. And Tony even tells AJ directly, "I see myself in you," at one point. Like Tony himself, AJ's personality is massively affected by his parents. Being in this shadow of this huge type A personality of Tony Soprano, and AJ having to have Livia too as a bonus, with him adopting some of her lines like saying, "It's all a big nothing." People want to be his friends only to talk about how his dad's a mob boss. Other kids don't want to fight him because of his dad. His whole life is overshadowed by Tony. And you can even extend this, if I may, to James Gandolfini's real-life son, also an actor, who even went on to play Tony Soprano like his father. AJ has what Carmela refers to at one point, the Sopranos curse, but we do see flashes of him trying to carve a path for himself, like with the military school. We see flashes of drive and motivation, but he's manipulated out of it by his parents. I mean, isn't a military school exactly what they wanted? A means to discipline AJ, and now they don't want it? No wonder he's confused. Tony and Carmela were truly clueless with AJ. The kid is studying, and Tony arrives and stops the studying by showing AJ a new car he's bought for him, and immediately takes it away, saying his grades need to go up, when he was just doing exactly that before Tony started honking his horn. Tony tells AJ that his Uncle Bobby is dead, and expects him to process it immediately like some robot. AJ asks big existential questions, and his dad's response is, "Go and get a blowjob." Not to mention his mother was listening at the door, further breaking the trust between child and parent. Tony wants AJ to be tough, but he never taught him how to be. Maybe when he was young he didn't have to learn, because growing up when Tony did was tough anyway. But that isn't the case with AJ, who's grown up in the suburbs with material comfort, and he doesn't have the tools to be like his dad. At the same time, his dad doesn't want him to be like him anyway. So what does he want? Jackie Sr.'s funeral is a very powerful scene. It's the first time AJ truly contemplates on who his father is. Every son has that moment when he realizes his father is not Superman. But for AJ, this epiphany goes a step further, given Tony is a mob boss. AJ sees for the first time his dad is a stranger. This loss of innocence perhaps being the first step towards AJ's self-destruction years later. In one episode, AJ's therapist says he sounds depressed again, and he responds, "You'd have to be fucking nuts not to be. I mean, you'd have to have your head wedged so far up your ass that all you could see is your own stupid face. I mean, everything is so fucked up." And in the same episode, we see Tony having the time of his life, gambling after Christopher's death. With his head so far up his behind, he only can view the tragedy of Christopher's death with how it benefits him. His deficient understanding of his son's suffering is further emphasized when he attends one of AJ's therapy sessions and in the middle of an important conversation, zones out and notices the tooth of a man he just curb-stomped on his leg. At the end of The Many Saints of Newark, Tony stares at the body of his mentor, Dickie Moltisanti, with the film implying this is where he chose the mob life. Perhaps AJ himself gets such a moment if he were to see his dad shot down in front of him after The Sopranos' famous cut to black. Maybe he would finally have that outlet to turn that rage outward and hurt other people, continuing and carrying the cycle of violence from father to son. Anyway, I could say more, but this video is starting to get really long, so I'll leave it there. Hopefully you may see AJ in a better light, or at least see that, even with his obnoxiousness, he was a troubled dude. So what do you make of AJ Soprano? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.